The Hidden World of Medieval Women, a quiet journey through forgotten life. Shadows behind the stone walls. Let your mind settle. Close your eyes if you like, and picture a quiet village wrapped in mist. Stone cottages rest under thatched roofs. A church bell tolls slowly in the distance. A fire crackles within a hearth, its smoke curling into the morning sky. We often speak of kings, knights, and castles, of battles fought and treaties signed, but so rarely do we pause to listen to the quiet voices of women who lived, worked, and endured in the folds of that history. Tonight, we gently enter the hidden world of medieval women. This is not a tale of glory or grandeur. It is a story of lives often unrecorded, but deeply meaningful, of the women who spun the thread, while others wrote the history. Let us wander through the forgotten corners of the medieval world and uncover the silent legacies left behind by mothers, daughters, healers, scribes, and quiet thinkers. No battles, no noise, just a slow walk through soft pages of history to honor those who were never meant to be forgotten. Women at the heart of the medieval household. In medieval Europe, the household was the center of life, and at the heart of that household was a woman. She rose with the sun, sometimes earlier, tending to the fire, preparing food, waking children. Her hands were always busy, stirring porridge, spinning wool, patching tunics, washing linens. The household was not merely a private space. It was a place of labor, production, and survival. Women managed storage, cured meat, preserved vegetables, and brewed ale. She might not have signed documents, but she made 100 quiet decisions each day. What to cook, what to mend, how to stretch food through the winter. Even in the smallest cottage, her labor wove the rhythm of the day. When the church bells rang for prayer, she paused, then returned to kneading dough or smoothing a child's hair. These moments rarely made it into history books, but without her, the pages of that history would have never turned. Labor, land, and livelihoods. Outside the home, women worked too. In fields, in shops, in markets, they gathered herbs, milked goats, sold cheese and cloth. Peasant women worked alongside their husbands on small strips of rented land. They planted, harvested, and gleaned, their skirts wet with morning dew, their hands calloused but steady. In towns, women might be bakers or brewers. Some worked as fullers, cleaning wool in vats of pungent liquid. Others took apprenticeships in textile crafts, becoming weavers or spinners for hire. And there were midwives, women who carried the quiet knowledge of childbirth and healing in their minds and hands. Though laws often placed limits on their rights to own land, some widows managed properties, shops, and fields, proving themselves capable stewards. In a world that preferred not to notice, their labor wasn't loud. It was steady, unrecorded in chronicles, but etched in every harvest, in every warm loaf of bread, and in every child nursed through illness. Knowledge, healing, and quiet wisdom. Not all knowledge came from books. In the medieval world, much of it lived in the minds and memories of women. She might not have learned Latin or walked the halls of a university, but she knew which herbs soothed a fever, which root calmed a child's cough, which leaves could ease a woman's labor pains. In the quiet dark of a village home, some women, called wise women by their neighbors, carried this folk wisdom like a sacred inheritance. They brewed teas, salves, and tinctures, not from scientific theories, but from generations of oral memory. Others took their skills even further. In some towns, women worked as physicians. In convents, they copied medical texts, wrote treatises on healing, and tended to the sick in quiet infirmaries. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, wrote entire books on natural medicine, mixing spiritual insight with healing practice. She was just one voice, but she carried the wisdom of many. Outside the cloister, women midwives walked muddy roads at night, lantern in hand, to help bring new life into the world. Their work was vital, yet rarely honored in records. They stood in the shadows of learned men, but it was their hands that delivered generations into being. Spiritual power in the cloistered life. For some women, the path to purpose led inward, behind stone walls and heavy doors, to the quiet world of the convent. The structures they maintained, the families they raised, the wisdom they shared, formed the foundation for centuries to come. Their letters, their prayers, their margins filled with doodles and notes, all speak to a world that once tried to silence them. Yet here they are, still speaking. Historians now look more carefully, sifting through wills, court records, religious texts, and household inventories to reconstruct a picture of lives lived fully, if not famously. Museums, libraries, and digital archives are beginning to tell their stories again, not just as accessories to men's lives, but as agents of their own destinies. In schools and books, in quiet videos like this one, we are rediscovering the truth long buried under centuries of neglect, a gentle reflection on forgotten lives. So now we return to the misty village, to the castle kitchen, to the convent garden, to the place where a woman once stirred a pot while humming a hymn, where another wrote a poem by candlelight, where a midwife waited patiently for a new cry to fill the night. These lives may seem distant, but they are not forgotten. They were mothers, workers, healers, thinkers, and survivors. Their footsteps echoed on stone floors. Their voices whispered prayers we'll never fully hear, but we remember them now. And in this quiet moment, perhaps their world feels just a little closer. Thank you for walking gently through history with me. Sleep well. And may the past always remind us of the voices worth hearing, even if they once spoke only in whispers. Daily life in the rhythm of the seasons. In the medieval world, time moved slowly, not by the ticking of clocks, but by the ringing of bells, the turning of seasons, the rhythm of the land. For women, this rhythm shaped everything. In spring, they gathered greens and planted seeds. They swept floors dusted with wind-blown pollen. They stitched garments for the warm months ahead, and counted stores of barley to see them through. In summer, they rose early with the light. They carried water from wells. They worked in gardens. They gathered fruits and dried herbs in bundles hung from kitchen beams. They repaired roofs, scrubbed walls with lime, shook rugs over railings, while bees hummed lazily nearby. Autumn meant harvest, wheat threshed in the fields, apples pressed for cider, nuts cracked open by firelight, as children listened to their mothers' stories, and grandmothers sang songs in half-forgotten dialects. Then came winter, quiet, cold, and close. Chores moved indoors, mending, spinning, telling stories beside the hearth. The seasons whispered, a kind of clockwork that guided medieval women through years of quiet perseverance. No single moment was spectacular, but together, they formed a life of texture, care, and patient work. Education and learning in a woman's world. What did it mean to be educated as a woman in a time when most books were locked in monasteries? For many, learning came not from parchment, but from people. A mother taught her daughter how to shape bread with soft hands, how to feel the wind and know if rain was coming, how to measure herbs without weights or scales. In some towns and noble homes, girls learned to read, not Latin, but vernacular texts, prayers, saints' lives, household advice. In convents, some nuns copied manuscripts in delicate script, adding flourishes and illustrations of flowers and birds and tiny dragons. Women who could write often left behind devotional reflections, letters, and household records. A few composed poetry. Others kept account books that revealed more than numbers. They told the story of daily survival through careful ledgers and thoughtful margins. Even in silence, these women learned. They watched, they remembered, they passed knowledge through voice and gesture, through touch and time. It was not the learning of scholars, but it was no less wise. Sisterhood, gossip, and female community. Though life was hard, medieval women rarely lived in isolation. Their strength often came from one another, from whispered gossip at the well, from shared laughter over laundry lines, from helping hands when sickness entered the home. In peasant villages, women worked side by side. They traded cloth and bread. They helped deliver babies. They watched each other's children. In towns, they formed guilds and networks, midwives, aloes, spinners, whose trades depended, not just on skill, but on trust. In convents, sisterhood was literal. Nuns lived together, prayed together, and buried one another, with solemn ritual and sacred hymns. Even in noble households, ladies-in-waiting formed small communities, reading, sewing, and navigating court politics together. These bonds weren't always soft. Women argued, they competed, they fought over property, position, and pride. But beneath it all was a deep interdependence, a web of female connection that helped them endure a world that often demanded their silence. These unseen sisterhoods formed the quiet scaffolding of medieval life, closing meditation, listening to the past in stillness. And now, as we come to the end of this long, quiet walk through a forgotten world, let us take a moment to sit beside the stillness. Let the weight of these lives settle gently in your mind. Not every story needs to be loud. Not every hero rides a horse. Sometimes, history is a woman, bent over a spinning wheel, a girl whispering a prayer, a grandmother planting leeks in cold spring soil. These were lives of patience, of small joys and quiet grief, of uncelebrated wisdom, passed from hand to hand, like bread at a simple meal. The world we live in was shaped by these women, in ways no monument ever recorded. But tonight, we remember them, and in doing so, we honor not just their memory, but their enduring presence in every quiet moment we cherish. So let the candles burn low, let the air grow still, and let the past hold you, softly, like a lullaby in the dark. Sleep well. Women and food, from hearth to feast. Food was more than sustenance. For medieval women it was life, labor, and language. Each morning began with tasks of preparation. Grain to be ground by hand. Oats simmered slowly in a clay pot. Water carried. Fire coaxed into flame. With careful breath, women prepared food not for pleasure, but to keep families alive. Through long winters and lean harvests, the peasant woman knew the importance of barley, cabbage, leeks, and salted pork. She preserved herbs with salt, baked bread in communal ovens, and knew which wild plants could flavor a stew or poison a man. In noble halls, women did not cook with their own hands, but they planned feasts. They oversaw servants. They chose menus that displayed their household's wealth and civility. Recipes were passed between women, not in books, but in memory. They cooked through mourning. They cooked for celebration. They fed entire households, from infancy to old age. Each meal was a quiet act of care, a rhythm of nourishment that shaped every day. Pregnancy, childbirth, and loss. One of the most dangerous moments in a medieval woman's life was childbirth. There were no hospitals, no anesthesia, no guarantee of safety. A woman might give birth at home, surrounded by other women, her mother a midwife, a friend whispering prayers. The pain was often endured in silence, with rosary beads clenched between trembling hands, or the hem of a linen sheet bitten between the teeth. Sometimes she survived, sometimes she did not. Infant mortality was high. Many mothers buried one, even half a dozen children, before watching one grow beyond the age of 5. Yet still they hoped, still they named each child with care, often after saints, or lost siblings, or whispered dreams of a safer future. The rituals of birth were surrounded by faith, salt placed in the cradle, prayers whispered into small ears, holy water kept nearby. These were not dramatic scenes. They were private, painful, and common. But each one was a threshold crossed in the quiet bravery of womanhood, beauty, clothing, and self-expression. Despite the hardships, medieval women still found ways to express beauty. A ribbon tied in the hair, a flower tucked behind the ear, A gown dyed with precious woad or madder. Most owned little. Clothing was practical, often hand-me-down, and patched over and over again. But within those limitations, they still cared about colors, fabrics, fit. A peasant girl might stitch embroidery into her apron. A noblewoman might commission a gown with silk sleeves. A widow might wear dark wool, out of mourning, but with polished boots and clean linen at her collar. Beauty was not frivolous. It was dignity. It was resistance against the harshness of life. In some convents, nuns wrote about the dangers of vanity, but others still painted images of Mary, with golden hair and jeweled crowns, a kind of holy beauty that gave comfort. Even grooming was sacred. Washing, combing, plaiting the hair became part of the rhythm of womanhood. Said, I'm still here, still alive, still whole. Outsiders, widows, heretics, and the marginalized. Not every woman fit the mold. Some lived at the edges, alone, feared, or forgotten. Widows were both vulnerable and powerful. They had freedom, but also risk. Without a husband's protection, some became beggars. Others became property owners. Still others joined religious orders to secure shelter. There were women who defied church teachings, who preached without permission, who followed forbidden beliefs, who were accused of heresy and burned for their defiance. The anchoress, a woman who chose to live in isolation, bricked into a small room beside a church, lived a life of contemplation and quiet renunciation. She saw the world through a single window. She spoke little, but her presence was felt in prayers and legends. Other women were labeled witch, often for being old or simply outspoken. They were midwives, herbalists, widows with too much knowledge and too few protectors. Their stories are often grim, but they are part of the truth. Medieval women were not all the same. They lived at every margin of faith, society, and expectation. And even in exile, they held fragments of power, wisdom, and humanity. Echoes in art and archaeology. Today, we look for them in fragments. A comb found in a grave, a spindle whirled beneath a cottage floor, a scribbled note in the margin of a book. In stained glass, they kneel in robes of blue and gold, their faces calm, their hands lifted in prayer. In illuminated manuscripts, they appear beside saints and beasts, symbolic, silent, but present. In ruins and abbeys, we find their footsteps, worn into stone stairs, into wooden floorboards, into the silent arches, where they once sang hymns, to the cold morning light. Sometimes we find their names, carved into grave slabs, etched into rings, written in court records. They speak to us, across time, not loudly, but with the patience of those who waited to be remembered. And now, we remember the marketplace, commerce, trade, and women's quiet power. The medieval marketplace was not merely a place of goods. It was a theater of survival, negotiation, and quiet courage. Beneath canvas stalls, among baskets of turnips and folded bolts of wool, women made themselves known. They knew the price of barley. They knew the cost of eggs. They watched the coins change hands with the precision of someone who could not afford to make a single mistake. Many were widows, no longer under a husband's name, and now navigating a space that judged them for being visible and judged them still if they were not. Some sold herbs, wrapped in twists of linen. Others brought butter in crocks, carried on their heads. From farms miles away, they came at dawn. They stood in rain. They bartered with butchers. They traded with tailors. They endured glances, gossip, taxes, and fines. Still they came. The marketplace was never written about in the grand chronicles, but it was a world that belonged to women as much as to men. And though no statue stands in honor of the woman who sold onions every Tuesday under the west gate of town, she held her community together With every humble transaction, children, daughters, and the future, a girl born in medieval Europe was born into expectation, not of greatness, not of power, but of obedience. She would be trained to serve, to carry, to watch, to listen, to remain small. And yet, even in those tight roles, she formed a mind that wondered. She played with dolls, made of rags. She watched her mother knead dough, learning when to turn, when to add flour, when to stop. She learned to spin, to scrape dishes, to keep her mouth closed when men spoke. But she also learned to laugh, to run, to find beauty in the shape of a feather, or the echo of her own voice in a stone corridor. Some girls learned to read, some did not. Some were sent away to marry before their voices changed. Some became servants in houses not their own. Others tended their younger siblings, mothering long before they were women. And some wrote letters, clumsy, careful letters that still survive in brittle parchment and fragile ink. In those letters, we hear her, a girl trying to understand why the world is so large and her freedom so small. Women's silence in the chronicle. If you open a medieval chronicle, a history book written by the hands of monks and court scribes, you will find names. Names of kings, of bishops, of warriors and saints. But you will find few of mothers, of daughters, of midwives, of weavers, of beggars, of wives. The chronicler wrote of the storm that struck a cathedral, but not of the woman who died in childbirth that same night. He described the feast held for a new alliance, but not the girl, married at 13, to a man who tripled her age. And so, for centuries, we believed they were silent. But women were not silent. They were silenced. Their stories are not absent. They are buried in receipts, in ledgers, in court complaints, in tiny notes scribbled beside saints' names. In the margins of a book of hours, they whispered, they argued, they loved, they endured. They stitched their presence into seams and lullabies, into bread dough and herbal remedies. And now, we are beginning to hear them again, not with fanfare, not with headlines, but with reverence for the hidden language they left behind, the enduring thread. To understand medieval women is to follow a thread, sometimes visible, sometimes faint. That thread winds through centuries. It weaves through illness and healing, loss and birth, hunger and harvest. It stretches from mother to daughter, from abbess to novice, from midwife to apprentice, from widow to stranger, who shared her loaf of bread at a church step on a winter morning. The thread is made of linen and blood, of patience and prayer. Ties together stories that history did not ask to record, but that humanity cannot afford to forget. When you listen to the quiet rhythm of a spinning wheel, or watch steam rise from a cooking pot, or feel the stillness of a cloistered garden, you are standing in the trace of that thread, and maybe, just maybe, is still connected to your own. Final reflections, a soft goodbye. So now, we draw the curtain on this long and quiet journey through the lives of women. History almost forgot, but we have not forgotten. Not tonight. We have walked through their kitchens, stood beside their market stalls, listened outside their convent walls. We have mourned their losses, celebrated their wisdom, and honored the small, strong hands that shaped the world. With no expectation of praise, history may have tried to silence them, but their legacy lingers in our words, in our rituals, in the quiet persistence of everyday care. Tonight, as you rest, know that you are part of that long story, not separate, not above, but connected to bread baked at dawn, to lullabies whispered in stone cottages, to the patience of women who lived without applause and loved without guarantee. Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow. The past is still here, waiting to be remembered by those gentle enough to listen. Sleep well, and may the women of history walk beside you in your dreams, their memory in the margins. Sometimes the past lingers, not in monuments or museums, but in the smallest things. A thumbprint in the margin of a book, a worn path between cottage and well, a patch on a dress, sewn with more care than time allowed. These are the echoes of medieval women, quiet, unnoticed, but never unimportant. We carry them with us, in rituals we no longer question, in words we speak without knowing their roots, in the strength we inherit, without understanding its origin. They are still here, not loudly, but always. And now, you've heard them, and still they wait. Somewhere in a forgotten book, a name fades beneath dust. A girl who once dreamed beside a hearth, her story never told. But tonight, by simply listening, you've brought her to life again. You've honored the women who stitched, stirred, soothed, and stayed strong, without asking the world to notice. They didn't write history, but they lived it. And now, as your breath slows and the night deepens, know this: you are part of that long and storied tale. It continues in quiet hearts, in patient hands, and in moments just like this one. Sleep gently. They're watching over you,